America's Federal Reserve swept into action today, slashing its benchmark interest rate to near zero in a bid to save the U.S. economy. The Reserve is trying to encourage lending to offset the impact of the outbreak. Travel is taking a hit, and so many Americans are scrambling to get home before they get stranded. They're being funneled into 13 airports to be screened. So far, 62 people have died in the U.S. from COVID-19, and there are more than 3,000 confirmed cases. But as more people return from abroad, that could change. Here's Jennifer Johnson.
Shoulder to shoulder, no social distancing at U.S. airports as Americans returning from Europe are forced to wait hours to be screened for COVID-19. Canadian travelers, too, coming from the U.S., concerned about what they'll face when they get home.
I'm anxious about what awaits me when I get back to Canada, just as my arrival time gets later and later in the day. I'm worried about long lines at YVR for customs and worried that they're not going to have appropriate measures in place there to separate people for social distancing.
Complicating the chaotic situation, a handful of TSA officers are now testing positive for the virus. Federal officials are working to get more staff to speed up the testing process, but local officials are furious.
Hundreds and hundreds of people, and that's exactly what you don't want in this pandemic.
The nation's top infectious disease doctor raising the possibility of a 14-day nationwide lockdown to keep people home, out of restaurants, bars, movie theaters, and other public places.
But I think we should really be overly aggressive and get criticized for overreacting.
Dr. Fauci says there are no plans yet for domestic travel restrictions, but warned everything is on the table. With limited testing available, many experts question whether the number of reported cases of COVID-19 in the U.S. is accurate. The White House promising millions more tests will be available soon.
We will now have access in the days ahead to more than 2,000 labs across the country that have the equipment today to process coronavirus tests much more rapidly and a much higher volume.
New York's governor is now calling on President Trump to activate the military immediately to help build more makeshift medical facilities.
Use them to come in right now, identify existing facilities that can be retrofitted, and use them to do it.
Ohio is now closing all bars and restaurants indefinitely. Empty pews Sunday at Washington's famed National Cathedral. Times Square is quiet. Desperate measures taken across the country to keep people home. Meanwhile, the White House has announced that President Trump has tested negative for the virus after being exposed to people who had tested positive. Jennifer Johnson, Global News, Washington.
COVID-19 has killed more than 6,000 people around the world. As cases spike, some countries are taking radical action by closing borders and imposing mandatory quarantines on anyone arriving from overseas. Britain's Health Secretary Matt Hancock confirmed today that measures similar to ones used during wartime will soon be imposed across the UK. Anyone over 70 years old will be told to stay inside, potentially for months. Car makers will be told to produce medical equipment, and hotels will be turned into hospitals.
We are going to take the powers to make sure that we can quarantine people if they are a risk to public health, yes. And that's important, and take other action that you just normally wouldn't.
Meanwhile, Denmark closed its borders yesterday to everyone except its citizens and residents. Germany is set to follow suit, shutting borders with France, Switzerland, and Austria. The Czech Republic, which has already closed its borders, is now weighing a nationwide quarantine. And in Australia, anyone arriving will now be forced to self-isolate for 14 days, and foreign cruise ships are banned from docking in that country. Italy suffered its most deaths in a single day. 368 people died in that country in just 24 hours. Spain is the second hardest hit country in Europe, with 289 deaths and almost 8,000 confirmed cases. The government is using drones to tell its citizens to stay indoors. They can only go out to buy food and medicine. All social gatherings are banned.